A man finds a signed apartment lease in his wife's desk drawer. 3 days after his own retirement party. 28 years of marriage. A woman gets a congratulations call from a real estate agent about a Lakehouse sale she knew nothing about. Her husband had the proceeds wired to a private account. And a grandfather learns the truth not from a detective or a phone, but from 9 words spoken by his 9-year-old granddaughter on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Welcome back to Venture and Karma. Let's get into it.
Story number 1. The lease in the drawer.
Robert spent 31 years as a structural engineer at the same firm. He was not a man who made grand gestures. He was a man who showed up, who finished what he started, who believed, without ever saying it directly, that consistency over enough time was the most durable form of love a person could offer. His wife, Patricia, had been beside him for 28 of those years. They raised 2 daughters together. They buried his parents and one of hers. They moved 3 times, renovated twice, and got through 2 college tuitions paid simultaneously without lasting damage to their marriage or their finances. At 62, Robert retired. The party his colleagues organized was warm and genuine. Old friends flew in. Speeches were made about his attention to detail, his steadiness under pressure, his habit of being exactly where he said he would be. Patricia sat at his right hand all evening. She held his hand when the speeches began. She told the room she was proud of him. He believed her completely. 3 days after the party, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Patricia left for a hair appointment. Robert stood in the kitchen with his coffee, feeling the specific strangeness of the first unstructured morning in 40 decades of adult life. He wandered into Patricia's home office looking for a pen. The second drawer from the top had always held stationery, spare batteries, the miscellaneous small objects that accumulate in a family home over time. He found the pen immediately. Beneath it was a manila folder. It was not a utility bill. It was not a medical document. It was a lease agreement for a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from their house, signed 14 months ago, in Patricia's name alone, with payments drawn from an account number Robert did not recognize. He sat down in Patricia's chair and read it 3 times. He was an engineer. His professional reflex was to verify the load before drawing conclusions about the structure. A single document was not a complete picture. He put the folder back exactly where he had found it. He went to the kitchen, poured more coffee, and sat down to think. Over the following week, Robert did what structural engineers do when they suspect something is failing quietly beneath the surface. He mapped it. He pulled their joint financial statements going back 18 months. He went through every line. He found the account the lease payments drew from. It had been opened 20 months ago with a transfer from their joint savings, during a week when Patricia had told him the bank was migrating their accounts to a better rate. From there, the account had received regular transfers from Patricia's personal income. It had been used with a consistent pattern. The lease, a grocery store 12 minutes away, a restaurant he had never visited with Patricia, 2 sets of theater tickets for evenings he had spent at home alone, told she was at book club. He found the name through a receipt, a home goods store, a duvet, 2 pillows, a shower curtain, purchased the week the lease was signed, with a printed gift note attached to the order. The note was from a man named Gerald. It said, "For your new place." He called his younger daughter that evening. She worked in family law. He told her he had a general question about what options a person had when they discovered their spouse had established a separate residence using shared marital funds. She understood within 3 questions that this was not a general inquiry. She drove to the house the following morning. She made 2 recommendations. First, engage a financial forensic specialist to establish the full scope of what had been redirected. Second,
Document Robert's own contributions to the marital estate across the full 28 years, the pension, the investments, the property equity his income had primarily built and sustained. The forensic specialist found 26 months of structured transfers, $91,000 moved in careful increments from their joint and personal accounts into the account Patricia had established. Each transfer calibrated to stay below the thresholds that would have generated automatic alerts. Robert spent 3 weeks compiling everything. Then he sat down at the kitchen table with Patricia and placed the folder between them. He did not ask her to explain. He told her he had already done that work. He told her his attorney would be in contact. Patricia cried. She said it had been a mistake. She said she would end it immediately. She said it had meant nothing. Robert listened to all of it. Then he said, "You signed that lease 14 months ago. My retirement party was 3 days ago. You held my hand and told the room you were proud of me. We are past the part where it meant nothing." The divorce took 11 months because Patricia used marital funds to maintain the separate residence over a documented 26-month period. The settlement reflected the full financial scope of the diversion. Robert retained the primary residence. He retained his full pension. Patricia's claim to it was successfully argued against, given the documented misappropriation of marital funds. Patricia moved into the one-bedroom apartment. Robert has since retired properly and completely. He walks every morning. He has taken up woodworking in the garage that is now entirely his. His daughters call every Sunday without fail. He told his younger daughter, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, that the hardest moment was not finding the folder. It was the retirement party, sitting at that table, 31 years behind him, her hand in his, the room applauding, not knowing. He said he has made his peace with it, but he still thinks about that Tuesday morning, the pen, the second drawer from the top, the moment a structure he had believed was solid showed him exactly where it had been failing, quietly and for a very long time.
Story number 2. The Lakehouse. Eleanor and her husband George built the Lakehouse the summer their youngest son left for university. It had been Eleanor's idea. She had driven past the plot of land for years on visits to her sister 2 hours north, watching it sit empty and wondering who owned it. When the children were grown and the main house felt too large, she found the plot was available. She brought George to see it on a Saturday in April. He looked at the view for a long time and said yes. They spent 18 months on the design and construction, drove up on weekends to watch the framing go up, to choose the window placement, to argue pleasantly about the porch railing. They spent their first night there on the bare floor, sleeping bags, a bottle of wine, the sound of the lake in the dark. George told her it was the best investment they had ever made. Eleanor told him it wasn't an investment. He laughed and said she was right. For 8 years, the Lakehouse was the center of everything. The family gathered there at Thanksgiving. The grandchildren learned to swim off the dock. Eleanor and George marked their anniversary there every year, the same weekend, the same table on the porch, the same bottle of wine they had been bringing since the first night. In the 9th year, George began talking about money. He raised it carefully, never with urgency, the way a person introduces a difficult subject at low volume and then waits for the other person to become accustomed to it. Retirement was more expensive than projected. Their investments had underperformed for 2 consecutive years. The Lakehouse was their largest physical asset. Perhaps they should consider their options. Eleanor was not interested in their options. The Lakehouse was not a financial instrument to her. It was the place she had designed as the container for the next chapter of their lives. She told him she was not ready. He said he understood. He said they would revisit it.
The following spring, he told her he had listed the property quietly, just to test the market. Some interest, but nothing serious. The listing had run its course. He was not going to relist until they were both ready. He was clear about that. Eleanor thanked him for respecting her position. In early autumn, her phone rang. The woman on the line identified herself as the real estate agent who had managed their Lakehouse sale. She was calling to confirm that final paperwork had processed correctly. She said it had been a pleasure handling the transaction. Eleanor asked her to repeat what she had said. The agent repeated it. The sale had closed 8 weeks ago. The property had transferred to the new owners. She hoped Eleanor and her husband were enjoying their next chapter. Eleanor took down the agent's name and brokerage number. She thanked her for calling. She ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table without moving for a long time. George was at the golf club every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, always the same. Eleanor drove to the county records office. She requested the deed transfer documentation. The sale had closed for $412,000. The receiving account was not one she recognized. Her name was not on it. She drove home. She went to George's study. George kept paper records of everything, organized by year in labeled folders. Eleanor had always found this quality in him reassuring, thorough, reliable, careful. She found the account statement in the current year's folder. The account had been opened 18 months ago. The Lakehouse proceeds had been deposited in full. Alongside them were a series of smaller transfers from their joint investment portfolio, going back the same 18 months, structured carefully, each one individually unremarkable. Together, they totaled $630,000. Eleanor photographed every page. She called her son, who was an accountant, and asked him to come the next morning. He spent 3 days reviewing the material. The transfers from the joint portfolio had been sized just below the thresholds that would have triggered the automated notifications their joint account was set to generate. The Lakehouse sale had been executed using a power of attorney document Eleanor had signed 11 years ago. George had presented it to her as a property tax reclassification form that required both signatures, a minor administrative matter. She had signed without reading it closely because he had always handled the administrative matters and she had always trusted him to do so. The document gave George the authority to transact property on her behalf. He had exercised that authority without telling her, without asking, 8 weeks before she received a congratulations call from a stranger on the phone. Eleanor engaged a property law attorney and a divorce attorney simultaneously. The property attorney established that the sale had been conducted using a power of attorney beyond its intended scope, giving Eleanor a legitimate claim to half of the proceeds as co-owner of the marital asset. The divorce attorney filed immediately, citing deliberate concealment of marital assets, unauthorized sale of jointly owned property, and structured diversion of shared funds. The judge assigned to the matter was a woman in her late 50s who had been on the family bench for 14 years. She reviewed the documentation with the thoroughness of someone who has seen this specific configuration before and has consistent views about it. Eleanor was awarded full recovery of her half of the Lakehouse proceeds, her half of the diverted portfolio transfers, the primary marital residence, and a portion of George's pension calculated to reflect the years of the marriage during which the concealment had been occurring. George moved to a rented house in a suburb that neither of them had ever had reason to visit. Eleanor kept the main house. She drives north to see her sister twice a year. She passes the road that leads down to the lake every time. She has not stopped at the Lakehouse since she learned it no longer belongs to her. She told her sister on one of those drives that what George had taken was not the property. Property is recoverable if the courts do their work. What he took was the memory of the first night, the floor, the sleeping bags, the wine, the sound of the lake in the dark. Him saying it was the best investment they had ever made. Her saying it wasn't an investment. Him laughing. She said she was still working out whether that memory still belonged to her or whether he had taken that too. She said she had not decided yet, but she had not stopped driving north, and she thought that meant something.
Two stories. Two people in the second half of their lives. What connects them is not the method. The lease and the Lakehouse are different kinds of deception. What connects them is the patience of it. These were not impulsive moments, not decisions made in a difficult season and immediately regretted. These were plans, maintained over months and years, executed with deliberate and ongoing care by people who had decided that the life they had built together was less important than the life they intended to build separately, and who had counted, in both cases, on the person beside them being too trusting, too accustomed to the routine, too certain of the structure to look closely enough. The third story today is different. There is no financial crime, no secret account, no document signed under false pretenses. There is a grandfather, a granddaughter, a Wednesday afternoon, and 9 words that arrived without warning and changed the entire architecture of a 41-year marriage in the space of a single car ride.
Story number 3. The Wednesday Friend. Frank was 67 years old and considered himself, without arrogance, a fortunate man. 41 years married to Irene, 3 children, 5 grandchildren. A career in municipal planning that had ended with a full pension and the reputation of being the kind of official who returned every phone call. Every Wednesday, he drove to the senior center 4 miles from the house. He had been doing it for 2 years, since a friend from his working years suggested it, and Frank discovered he was better at cards than he had expected. Irene was glad he had somewhere to go. She had her own Wednesday, her own routines, the garden, the book club, Tuesday mornings with their daughter. 41 years of marriage had given them both the security to have separate afternoons without requiring an account of every hour. On a Wednesday in October, Frank picked up his granddaughter Sophie from school. She was 9 years old. She talked the way 9-year-olds talk when they are confident of their audience, continuously and with complete authority. She was describing her upcoming dance recital, who was coming, where they would sit, what she was wearing. She mentioned Grandma and Grandpa. Then she said, "Is your friend coming too, the nice lady from the park?" Frank kept his eyes on the road. He asked her where she had heard about a friend from the park. Sophie said Frank had mentioned her. He had called one Wednesday when Sophie was visiting her grandmother. He had said he was running late because he had run into his friend from the park and they had had coffee. Sophie said Grandma had gone a little quiet after the call, but had not said anything about it. Frank drove the rest of the way without speaking much. He had not been to the senior center that particular Wednesday. He had called Irene and mentioned the friend casually, in passing, in front of a 9-year-old, apparently without registering that a 9-year-old remembers everything that sounds even slightly out of the ordinary. Frank had been meeting a woman named Helen for 18 months. He had met her on the walking trail near their neighborhood. She was a widow, easy to talk to. Their trail conversations had become coffee, and the coffee had become, over 18 months, something Frank had not allowed himself to name precisely. He had not been physically unfaithful to Irene. He was certain of this. It mattered to him enormously. But he had spent 18 months giving Helen something he had been quietly withholding from his wife: his full attention, his honest feelings about retirement, about aging, about the specific anxiety of a man who had been defined by his work and was no longer sure who he was without it. He had been telling Helen things he had decided Irene did not want to hear. He had been emotionally present with Helen in a way he had stopped being emotionally present at home. And he had built the space for this by filling his Wednesdays with something other than what he had told Irene. When Frank arrived home that evening, Irene was in the kitchen making tea. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the back of her head. Her gray hair cut the way she had worn it for 15 years, the particular way she held the kettle. He sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything.
Not because Sophie would eventually say more, not because he had been caught in any technical sense, because he was 67 years old and had been married for 41 years and had spent the entire drive home understanding, with a clarity he had not expected to feel, that the man he wanted to be was not compatible with what he had been doing on Wednesdays. Irene listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked him one question. She asked whether Helen knew he was married. Frank said yes, Helen knew. They had discussed it. Helen had told him early on that she would not continue seeing him if he was not prepared to be honest with his wife. Frank had told her he would be. He had not been. Irene stood up from the table and went upstairs. Frank sat alone in the kitchen. The following morning, she came down as usual. She poured coffee. She sat across from him. She told him she had been awake for most of the night. She had thought about it from every direction she could find. Then she said something that Frank has since described to the one close friend he eventually told as the most precise and most difficult thing anyone has ever said to him. She said, "I am not angry that you found someone easier to talk to. I am angry that after 41 years, you decided I was someone you needed to hide things from. You decided I could not handle your honest feelings. You made that decision about me without asking me. And that is what I am going to need time to forgive." They did not separate. Irene was clear and immediate on this point. She was not ending the marriage, but she was also not pretending the conversation had not happened and did not intend to. She asked Frank to end the friendship with Helen. He did. He wrote her a handwritten letter explaining that he had told Irene and that he was ending things. Helen replied with one line, wishing him and his wife well. It was, Frank thought, the most dignified response available to her. Frank and Irene began seeing a counselor, not because the marriage was failing, but because Irene had identified something real. Frank had been making decisions about what she could handle without consulting her. He had been managing her exposure to his own interior life the way a person manages a risk, deciding on her behalf what she was strong enough to hold. That habit had been running quietly through their marriage for longer than either of them had known. The counselor worked with them for 14 months. They are still together, still in the same house, still going through the harder thing, which is not starting over, but moving forward in full knowledge of what they now know about each other. Frank still picks Sophie up from school on Wednesdays. Sophie is 11 now. She still talks the way she has always talked, with complete confidence in her audience. Frank listens to everything she says with the specific attentiveness of a man who has learned, at 67, that the things you say in passing, in front of people you are not watching closely, are always the things someone remembers most precisely. He walks in the mornings now, earlier than before, when the trail is mostly empty. He goes with Irene. She walks faster than him. She always has. He keeps up.
3 stories,
A man who found a lease in a drawer 3 days after his retirement party. A woman who received a congratulations call about a sale she knew nothing about. And a grandfather who told the truth, not because he was caught, but because 9 words from a child in a car seat reminded him with complete precision who he had always intended to be. 3 different situations, 3 different outcomes. Robert rebuilt quietly on his own terms in a house that is entirely his now. Eleanor is still deciding what belongs to her and what was taken. Frank and Irene are still working, still together, doing the thing that is harder than leaving, which is staying honestly, with full knowledge of everything and choosing to continue forward anyway. There is no single lesson here that covers all 3. What I will say is this: every person in today's stories was in the second half of their life when the truth arrived. And in every case, the truth arriving was not the end of the story. It was the first moment in a long time when the story was being told honestly. That is not nothing. Depending on what you do with it, it is almost everything. If these stories reached you today, hit the like button and subscribe to Venture and Karma. We are here every week. Tell me in the comments which of these 3 stayed with you: the man who found the lease, the woman who lost the Lakehouse, or the grandfather on a Wednesday afternoon who finally said the thing he should have said a long time ago. I read every comment. Keep your eyes open, and I will see you in the next one.